to chapter 7. This is where we will start looking at more diverse groups, not just one single group. So you can see by the heading, it's Jewish, Early Christian, and Byzantine art. And we will have this massive PowerPoint, it's not that massive, into 3 sections. So the first section begins here and now. And first of all, commercial break. This is about a trip that I've been working on since we had our stay-at-home order. So I'm not really certain if it's going to happen. A couple of things have to fall into place, but the plans are definitely all made to take a group of students to Rome next spring break. So this is in conjunction with an LBST course at the 2000 level, which is 2012, I believe. And the course will be dedicated to looking at the change from pagan religion to Christianity in the early centuries. So it's going to be a very full week, and you can see by the pictures here in the description that we're going to visit temples, shrines, catacombs, and churches in Rome. And we'll make 2 short little day trips outside of Rome too to see some more. So if you're interested, you need to contact the Office of Education Abroad or go to their website. It can be found on the UNCC website. And by the time you read this and you get to this unit, the brochure and pricing and everything should be available. It's not at the moment, but I can tell you that the plans are made. Now, in the eventuality that it's not safe to travel next March, I rather imagine we would just adjust and do our course in town, but not have the cost of the trip to Rome. So that would be, I'm sure, completely refundable if the trip doesn't happen. So this is just, if you want to participate, the opportunity is there. So here's the map of Rome I showed you last time, and we finished looking at the Roman Empire. We talked about changes in the Roman Empire at the very end, how that very veristic style of portraiture gave way to a symbolic mode. And the symbolic mode, I told you, I don't know if you caught that, will remain dominant in Europe throughout the Middle Ages. And it won't be until much later, really in the Gothic period, when things start to get more naturalistic again. But so that's just a little review. So the city of Rome, we looked at before. We saw the Tiber River here. And I told you I would show you the map again and tell you some more details. So as you look at the city, and here is the Flavian Amphitheater, also known as the Colosseum. So there are a lot of interesting features here that existed in ancient Rome. So start noticing similarities of structures like these oblongs here, and you can read the word circus, I think there's a circus here, and then you start to see them everywhere. This one right down here is longer than the others, and in fact it's called the Circus Maximus, which means the Great Circus. And a Roman circus is not like our circus. A circus is a racetrack. So it was oblong, and it was a long loop that horses or chariots would race around, and there would be winners. So it's a competition that does not necessarily involve the shedding of blood, unlike the blood sports in the Colosseum. Another structure you see over and over again, you see this kind of thing, and there's one here, there's one up here. You might be thinking that they're forums because we saw forums last time, but I mean, look at the size of this compared to the Colosseum. This is like totally huge. This is not a forum, this is a bath. So a bath was like a public gym where there were actual baths, places where people could bathe. There were pools of cold, hot, and in between water. There were exercise yards where people could go out and work their muscles. You could come in and sweat. You could get massage. So the bathhouse was a huge structure. Um, all of these things, the things you can see on the map, the bathhouses, the circuses, even the Flavian amphitheater, were built by emperors for the people so that the people would love them and accept them and not try to get rid of them. It's just politics in the old days. So another thing I'm going to point out in this map is leading out of Rome, there are these straight lines, several of them, and they exit through the gates of the city. So the walls had gateways, and that was the only way in or out. You had to go through a gate. So the straight lines are the Roman roads. And I told you that the Romans were famous for engineering roads, and they built roads that connected major cities in the empire. So I'm bringing this up because with this huge population in the city of Rome and people dying at a normal rate, people had to be buried outside of the city. The Roman law said that nobody could be buried inside the city. A couple of exceptions were made for emperors. So we have up here the mausoleum of Caesar Augustus, and I believe Trajan was buried under his column as well, and maybe others. So because of that, there are cemeteries. Like outside of every one of the gates, there were cemeteries on either side of the road, and the cemeteries very quickly filled up. So the Romans, using their ingenuity, rather than going further and further out of town, they went down into the ground. So they would dig these cemeteries underground. They would tunnel into the tufa, which is that soft stone we saw in the Etruscan tombs. They would tunnel down and create these underground cemeteries. This is the passageway that they would have carved, and they would then carve these niches where you could put your remains, either ashes or bodies. And these were the cheapest. This was the bargain section, and these are called loculi, or loculus is singular and loculi is plural, just means place, a place of the body. This was, like I said, cheap. But if you were very wealthy, your family could afford to have a little chamber carved out just for your family to use. And this was convenient because I hope you see similarities with the Etruscan graves. So people would come to celebrate the death of their relative when they put them in the grave, and they would have a feast down here in this underground chamber. There are some graves that even have little stoves, little cooking areas where people could prepare food. So the reason we're looking at this is because the family that owned these little cubicles, they are called cubiculum or cubiculi, could decorate it, could plaster the walls and paint it with whatever they wanted. So often we see representations of what they believed, so of their religion. And this is where we see the earliest Christian art, because Christians, there were many Christians practicing their faith within Rome, but at various times with various emperors, they were persecuted, so they were not allowed to worship freely. The main argument that the Romans had with the Christians is that they refused to worship at the Roman temples. It goes against their rules. Same with the Jews, only the Jews were not nearly as troublesome. The Jews did not spread their faith actively like the Christians did. So the Christians were a target, but they could express their faith in the privacy of their home and in the privacy of their tomb. We'll talk more about Christianity's practice very soon. So this is a catacomb or a cubiculum of a Christian family, and there's Christian imagery up on the ceiling. These are mostly from the 3rd century, which is the 200s. So you can see right in the center is a roundel, and this has, I know it's very difficult to read, so I'm going to help you. There's a man standing in the center, and he's wearing a very short tunic. And lying on either side of him on the ground are some little animals. These are sheep. The standing man also has a sheep on his shoulders. This is the way these early Christians depicted Jesus. And there are many representations of Jesus as a shepherd. And if you think about it, if you're familiar with the Bible or the story of Jesus, you know that he talks many parables about shepherds and sheep, and how that caring, that nurturing is part of God's love for humans. So that's very important iconography. And then all around it, we have these little half circles, and they contain more Christian iconography. They contain illustrations from the story of Jonah and the whale. So Jonah was a character in the Hebrew scriptures, also known as the Old Testament. And Jonah is used by the early Christians as a parallel, as showing a foreshadowing. This is called iconology in the study of these early centuries. So he parallels, or he foreshadows Jesus, and he does that because the story of Jonah had Jonah swallowed by a whale or a sea monster. And he stayed in the belly of the whale for 3 days, and then he was spit up, and he was alive. So this is seen as a foreshadowing of Jesus's crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. That Jesus stayed in the ground for 3 days, and then he rose up, and he was alive again. So here we have, I know this is not the best one, not recognizable, but it is Jonah sleeping under a gourd vine. Over here is Jonah being spit up out of the whale. It's kind of hard to read. I'll show you some more Jonahs presently. So this is the ceiling, like I said, and all around the chamber would have been these niches, just like in the hallway, that would have the bodies of the dead. So another Christian cubiculum, and this one is later. This would have been after Christianity was legalized by Constantine. So here's an image of Jesus that is quite different from the Jesus I just showed you, the shepherd. So we're going to see Jesus morph the way people imagine him looking, because nobody alive ever saw Jesus. There was never a portrait made of him during his lifetime, so everything is completely imaginary. So this Jesus now has a beard and a halo, quite different from our shepherd boy. Over here we have a Moses striking the rock. I'm not sure what's on that wall, but 4th century. So this also should resonate. I hope it resonates. I hope you're picking up on some of these details. When I showed you Marcus Aurelius, and I said that beards became really fashionable because they sort of evoked wisdom. So putting a beard on Jesus could be related to that aspect of Roman art, that their ideas of Jesus are changing and maturing, and he's being seen more as a philosopher or a source of wisdom rather than just simply a caregiver like the shepherd. Here's one of my favorite foreshadowings and Christian iconography is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is a story also from the Hebrew scriptures, from the book of Daniel. And there were 3 Jewish boys who were part of the Babylonian captivity when Nebuchadnezzar took captive the Jews, took them from Jerusalem, took them over to Babylon. So yes, the same Babylon we saw, and wanted every Jew that he captured to worship the local deities like Marduk. And of course the Jews refused because it was against the 10 Commandments. And so they said, I'd rather die than displease God. And so Nebuchadnezzar tried to make an example of both Daniel, throwing him in a lion's den, and these 3 Hebrew lads by throwing them into the fiery furnace. So we have the 3 Hebrew lads in the fiery furnace, holding up their arms in the prayer position of orans. I forgot to point that out in an earlier one. Let's back up. So this position of upraised arms is prayer, and they're praying to God for salvation. And this, of course, would resonate with Christians who are hiding from the Romans, who the Romans want them to practice pagan religion, and they're not, and they're being captured and tortured. So this is a parallel situation from the Old Testament. Now I'm going to back up and show you the other orans that I forgot to point out. So in this cubiculum, these little sections here, there are people that are thought to be representations of the family who owned this cubiculum. And all around in each one of these sections, a person is raising their arms in prayer. So that's also very common iconography. It wasn't until much later that folding the hands in front of the chest becomes a prayer pose. So I just use Christian examples to show you how people in the catacombs, in their own little cubicles, could put paintings that represented their faith. But here's one that's not Christian. And the Romans did it too. So it's just that we've had our time with Roman art. So now we're looking at these people who were not practicing Roman religion. And the other is the Jews. So this is a Jewish cubiculum in Rome, in the catacombs. And Jews have very strict adherence to the Ten Commandments. And one of the Ten Commandments says, you should not make unto yourself any graven image of anything on earth or under the earth or in the sea or in heaven. So just simply do not make any iconography. Don't do anything. I have the quote here. You shall not make a carved image for yourself, nor the likeness of anything in the heavens above, or in the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. So it's kind of a fear, it's kind of a tension that they don't want to ever be tempted to worship an image. They've got, the negative example of what happened to the people in the desert when they worshiped the golden calf. So it's like a bad thing. So they tend to avoid it for the most part. And they represent their religion with things like how they illuminate things they had on their altar, like a 7-branched candlestick or the Ark of the Covenant, both of which are represented here. So nobody's going to worship a candlestick. It's just not going to be done. So now we're going to, that was sort of what's happening in underground Rome. And we will definitely be visiting at least 2 different catacombs on our trip to Rome in spring break, if that happens. And here's the Roman Empire again. And we're going to see some expression of these other religions on the very fringes of the empire. In fact, we're going way over here to Syria, modern-day Syria. I think they also called it Syria in those days, to this outpost of the Roman Empire. And it was a little town called Dura-Europos. And in the town of Dura-Europos, it was a little walled city. It was on a river out there, whichever one, Tigris or Euphrates, is further west. It was on that one. And the Persians, the same Persians, were attacking at one point in history, and the city had to be fortified. So what the Romans in Dura decided to do was sort of fill in all the houses that were built up against the wall on the outside. So that would essentially thicken the wall. What it did is kind of like what happened in Pompeii, but not nearly as extensive. So they filled in houses that happened to be on the wall. And then the army attacked. Dura-Europos fell. It was then deserted. It was I'm sure everyone there was killed. It was left in a state of ruins for centuries and not discovered till much, much later. Then people excavated all those houses that had been filled in, and they found some interesting things. This is one house in Dura-Europos that had been used as a Jewish place of worship. Um, and unlike the catacomb I just showed you, this place of worship is full of figural paintings illustrating the Old Testament stories, or the Hebrew Scripture stories. And you can see from this that there are 3 registers showing here. There's a niche on the wall. This is where the Jews would keep their Torah scrolls. So Jewish religion has text, it has a book, and it's kept in local houses of worship in the form of scrolls, large scrolls, and they are pulled out on the Sabbath and they are read to the people. So people hear the stories over and over. Those are the stories that are illustrated here. So let's look at a different picture of this. Here's one with a little bit better lighting so you can see the Torah niche, and you can see more of the paintings on the walls and the fact that they go onto another wall. Now I'm going to show you a detail of one of these, and keep in mind now we're looking at Roman painting, but it is far, far away from the heart of the Roman Empire. It's far away from the people who did those beautiful paintings in Pompeii or similar paintings in the city of Rome. So this is like way out in the boonies. That's why I showed you the map. So the painting here is not really very good. This is a scene from, let me get the son. This is the sons of Jesse. So this is where Samuel is blessing David, King David. This is where Jesse was a man who had several sons, and one of those sons was chosen by God to be the king. And this is Jesse. Oh, sorry, not Jesse, Samuel, the priest, choosing or showing which one it is. Now look at the sons. They all look identical. Remember the Roman painting style where even the portraits of the ancestors, they all look different. This is what I'm talking about when an artist doesn't care to differentiate. He says they're all brothers, so they all look the same. And they do look the same. The only differences are their clothing, the different colors, but there's the blessing of David. So this is very naive painting, not skilled at all, very rustic. Another Jewish piece from further away is out in Galilee in Israel, and this one is, I think, also indicative of what was happening on the fringe of society. Still Roman Empire, even though the Roman army had destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, it's still controlled by Rome, so still Roman. And this at this time. Well, anyway, let's look at this floor. So it's a mosaic floor, just like the mosaics that we saw in Pompeii. And it's a very large rectangular floor divided into 3 main frames, main sections. The center section is the signs of the zodiac. The bottom is a story from the book of Genesis. It's the story of Abraham. And up at the top, we have again the Ark of the Covenant and the menorahs, the 7-branch candlesticks. Now I wanted you to appreciate the drawing. So first of all, I know you're going to be looking at the signs of the zodiac and you're going to find your own sign, and just notice the drawing, the skill of it. It's really very much like a child's drawing. Look at the lion here of Leo. It's crazy. Over here, similar lions. I mean, this is a mosaic floor, so it is very permanent, and you would think that they would go out of their way to find a talented artist to do the best job possible because it's going to last forever. But this is what they end up with. And then the picture of Abraham is just bizarre. I mean, here are his 2 little accomplices here, and here's Abraham and his son Isaac. He's holding up here. Sorry, it's very pixelated, but trust me, it's the drawing is very poor, very, very poor. I don't quite understand what was going on there. Here's the way it looks with the people in Galilee putting up these little blocks so you can stand up on them and take pictures of the floor, because it's very unusual. Survivability of Jewish art is just so rare. So there's not a lot of it. And I've shown you just about all you're going to see. So now we're going to talk about early Christianity. And this is the Christian house that was at Dura-Europos. So this is the same town where that Jewish house church was. And the same pool of artists is available, one would assume, to the Christian community as there. So a word about the practice of Christianity in the first centuries of its practice. And that is, it started off as just a very casual, informal gathering of believers in each other's homes. And they would meet in their home where they would share a meal. It was often like a potluck dinner. So potlucks go way back. And everybody would bring some food to share, and they would put all the food out. And even people who didn't bring food, if you were very poor, it didn't matter. You would share in this love feast. And Paul at one point refers to it as a love feast. So that's what it is. So they would meet for fellowship, have a meal. Part of the meal would then be one of the leaders reminding everybody present of what Jesus said when he shared his last meal with his disciples, which becomes the communion or the Eucharist, where he would take bread and wine and bless them and say, "This is my body, this is my blood given for you." So that was part of it. If anybody present knew stories about Jesus, or if any traveler was there who came with new stories, they would then tell the stories orally to the gathering of people. So this is how the parables were shared. The stories about Jesus's life were shared orally. It's not for a long time that there's anything written. Paul, in the first century, wrote a few letters to a few churches, and the people who lived there had those letters, and then they copied them off and sent them around. But Scripture evolves very slowly and very deliberately. It's really not our concern. I'm just telling you about this. So the church, this group of believers, also had an initiation rite, which was baptism. And it started off by just sort of symbolically representing your birth, with going into a tub of water and coming out again to sort of remind you, or to remind people who are watching, of the immersion from the birth canal. So baptism is a new birth, and this is what this has been interpreted as being, this little tank over here in this corner of this room. There's also paintings on the wall that are in very bad condition, and they're also poorly drawn, so I'm not even going to discuss them. The ones in the Jewish house were in much better condition. Now here's a plan of that house showing more like the various rooms here. Here's the entrance, and over here is that baptismal room. So this is the courtyard, and people would gather in one of these big rooms. So this is in Dura. So that's the early practice of the underground church. This is the end of part 1, so you're getting the basic foundation, and stay tuned for more on early Christian art.